Video.
Get ready. You're listening to Give God 90
That's illegal, right?
live.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Welcome everyone to Give God 90. We are live on a Thursday night. My name is Jerry Mitchell,
I'm Myra Mitchell.
the ever improving health-wise.
I'm getting there.
After your setback with diverticulitis, you have you're almost over the nastiness of the antibiotics that they give you to cure the stuff that you usually get. Mm-hmm. So there you are. Welcome to everyone who is on Facebook and everyone who is on Spreaker. We have big news here in a second about that because, believe it or not, one of the reasons I went with Spreaker is because they do they distribute to a whole lot of places. It's a really good place if you're going to do a podcast because they will distribute it for you. And we are now... Are you ready for the drum roll? We are now on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts, as long as Spotify and some other places. So we are out there all over the place doing all kinds of fun things and getting the word out.
Yes.
So there we are. You got sound on that?
I do.
Okay, good. There was something else I was going to mention before I get too far. Oh, well. Anyway, if you've been to Give God 90 website, givegod90.com, givegod90.com, I did a few upgrades the other day. I was actually on there, and it bothered me a little bit when I first went on there because I checked how many people have visited, and it says, how many people have visited this month? It said 0. I thought that's kind of odd, but then I realized it was November 1st.
No.
First thing in the morning. So it would reset to 0.
True.
But the good news is, from prior to that, it was the month before that was 255 just in that 30-day period from all over the world. So that's a good
awesome.
thing.
Thanks everybody for joining in.
But I did change some things. Instead of just leaving regular links on there, now there's actually buttons you can click. Says, go here, go there. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's nice. You made it more user-friendly.
I tried to make it
now I can navigate.
Now you can navigate, yes. I know what I was going to say. The Apple podcast, I know, works because you listened to Monday nights.
I did.
On it last night.
I needed to do that.
Yes, you did.
I need to know what's going on for tonight.
And by the way, if you didn't listen to Mondays, you don't have to have heard that before you listen to this, but it would be a good idea to go back and listen to it if you didn't. So that's always a good thing to do because I get messages throughout the week, and it kind of helps me know where I need to go. Mm-hmm. So when I get questions, it's just one of those things we'll get into a little bit more later. The buttons that I actually did include on the website, though. I actually did add one for my YouTube channel. So you don't have to go search through YouTube for that. You can go to Give God 90. It takes you right there. Here's a little secret. When I do the teachings for Messianic Delaware, they're basically narrated PowerPoints. So all of those videos are on my YouTube channel. That's how Messianic Delaware gets them because they link to that.
Cool. All right.
So if I teach, I typically try to send them to Carl so he can link that either on Friday or Saturday. But they have to be up and ready to do that, and they're up and ready to do that on Friday afternoons. So if you can't make the Messianic Delaware Fellowship on a particular Friday night, you can actually go to my YouTube channel and hear it. So that's kind of cool. There's just a little secret
that's
for you
cool.
guys. Okay. Monday, I put out, and I think it was How the Role of Women Changed on throughout the Bible. Mm-hmm. You just liked that, didn't you? Mm-hmm. Thought so. So, by the way, if you're listening on Spreaker, the chat is open. It's ready to go. Of course, Facebook always ready to rock and roll with that kind of thing, waiting for your input, so to speak. But Friday, when I did the How the Role of Women Changed, I brought out a pretty basic what we've overlooked over the years. What many people have overlooked over the years. I was included in that because I thought, how in the world do you go from, the Almighty making a helpmeet, somebody to help, to turning them into somebody that was considered less than a person, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not what it meant at all. It didn't have anything to do with that. The change occurred after the Babylonian exile. When they came back into the land from Babylon, they brought with them some of those pagan traditions that said, you treat women as less of a person. So for everybody who thinks that the Bible is the one who discriminates against women, it's not the Bible doing it. The Bible actually upholds and really exalts women. Mm-hmm. And the entire relationship. It's the pagan cultures that actually are creating the problems. Mm-hmm. So that's something you don't want to overlook. And we brought that out. And one of the questions that I had this week was, well, how could they let that happen? I'm not going to be the one to answer for people who lived 2,500 years ago, 700 years ago. I can't answer that question. I don't know how they let it happen. I just know it did. So how those things came about was just a process of time, like what we're going to talk about tonight. Mm-hmm. The really, really cool thing, though, is the way the Almighty designed us to live wasn't to be at odds with each other. It was really to come together as a single unit, and the things that I can't do, you should be able to do. Things that you can't do, I should be able to do.
Right.
But it's me who should be taking the position of, I was here first, I'm the source, not, head in ancient Hebrew means source, not authoritative. So I get to set the role of what happens. I get to set the tone for the family. So that means, if dishes need to be done,
you do the dishes.
Guess who should start to do the dishes?
And he does.
Now, when diapers need to be changed, fathers out there, trust me on this, you don't want kids with dirty diapers.
Because then you get diaper rash.
Yep. Get over yourself and change the kids' diapers. Set the tone. You set the standard for the house. It's and the family. It's not you ordering people around. Mm-hmm. It's you lead by example. So that's how that operates. So another question I got was, well, and how in the world do we get this thing about the whole marriage thing going on that we have today? And really, it is a slight change to traditions over time. Mm-hmm. Now, if you will open your Bible to Genesis 24, and you're reading from the Tree of Life version, so if it's not just like yours, it's okay. Okay, all right? This is the Tree of Life version. You're going to read verses 1 through 4 to start with, and then don't close it because I'm going to have you read some more.
Now Abraham was old, advanced in years, and Adonai blessed Abraham with everything. Then Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who managed everything that belonged to him, "Now put your hand under my thigh, so that I may make you take an oath by Adonai, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from among the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I am dwelling. On the contrary, to my land and to my relatives you must go and get a wife for my son Isaac."
Okay. A lot of people read this and they get hung up on two things. Why in the world would Abraham tell this other man to stick his hand under his thigh to take an oath? That comes from a Chaldean tradition. Okay, that is how you were to swear to each other, just like shaking hands today, only it's at a much deeper level, more intimate level.
I would say.
To do that, you actually had to bend over in front of somebody and be submissive, right? Mm-hmm. So Abraham's using that ancient Chaldean tradition there, and he says, look, here's what I need you to do. And he picks his most trusted, his oldest servant, the one who's been with him the longest. Doesn't mean old in age.
Right.
It means the one who's been with him the longest. So what he's doing is he's saying, look, I trust you. You're going to go find a wife for my son. And that's the other thing they get hung up on. Is like, wait a minute. They're going to go pick a wife. And they get kind of hung up on the Fiddler on the Roof matchmaker thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not ancient Hebrew tradition. That's not biblical tradition. The Fiddler on the Roof matchmaker, that comes from much later, and it probably didn't get started. Can't really find a good source for that, but the earliest source that I could find was around the 16th century. So that's when outside sources other than family started looking. Next verse I need you to read is verse 22. Because this is interesting. It's going to get us into a lot of things here.
Now after the camels had finished drinking, the man took out a nose ring of gold weighing a half shekel, and 2 bracelets on her hands weighing 10 shekels of gold.
That's a lot of gold.
That is a lot of gold.
Okay. Very quickly, the story is that the man goes to this place and he sees the well. The women are coming out, and he prays. He says, Lord, I need a sign. My paraphrase. Okay. I need to know which one of these, if any of them, is the one that I need to take home for Isaac. Mm-hmm. And it works out that Rebecca comes out. He asks for a drink. She gives him a drink, and then she waters his camels. And he said, this is it. This is a sign that we've agreed on. This is what I know is going to happen. And he takes out a nose ring, and he takes out 2 bracelets weighing 10 shekels. That's all together. That's total weight, by the way. So it's in verse 22.
It was a half shekel for the nose ring and 2 bracelets weighing 10 shekels of gold.
Okay, so 10.5 shekels of gold. That's a lot of gold. That's a lot of gold. A lot of things are going on here, though. A lot of things are happening in that verse. First is he is making an offer. Mm-hmm. And the offer is a nose ring and 2 bracelets. How many women getting married today would allow someone to put a ring in their nose rather than on their finger?
Not many.
Not very many. Not very many. So the concept that many Christians have about nose rings, get over it, folks, because it starts in Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
It starts in Genesis. culture is a weird thing sometimes, but it starts in Genesis. I can go off on culture all kinds of different ways, but I won't, much as I want to right now. That's okay. The other thing we see is he is offering her something of value, right? Mm-hmm. So now we have this exchange. He's not paying her for watering his camels. Something's going on, because the next thing he asks her is, do you have a place where I can spend the night? Is a room in your house where I can sleep and my camels can sleep and we can rest? Because now he has to go negotiate. Mm-hmm. He's not done yet. He's got some negotiating to do. She says, of course. She takes him home, introduces him to her father, and the negotiating takes place. Verses 58, I believe, is where I need you to be now. I think it's verse 58 is where this agreement really is sealed.
So they sent Rebekah, their sister, off with her nanny, and Abraham's servant and his men, and they blessed Rebekah and said to her...
Whoa. Back up one then. Back up to...
Wait a minute, did you say 58 or 59?
58.
Sorry. Then they called Rebekah and said to her, will you go with this man?
Okay, keep reading.
So they sent Rebekah, their sister, off with her nanny.
Wait a minute. You skipped.
Nope.
Will you go with this man? She said...
Oh, she said, I will go.
I thought I was losing my mind there for a minute. Okay. The family asks Rebekah, will you go? The negotiating's been done. She knows what the plan is. She knows she's going to go meet this fellow named Isaac and become his wife. Who gets to decide whether she goes or not?
Well, they just asked her if she'll go.
They
and
just
she
asked
said she will
her.
Go.
Does this sound like ownership?
No.
Does this sound like an agreement? Now, she's never met Isaac.
Right.
Chances are, if she had her eyes on some fella close by,
she would have said
no.
No.
She would have given the gold back. Probably wouldn't have accepted it to start with.
Right.
And the deal would have been off. It would have been a no-go. Isaac would have had, I don't know, somebody other than Rebekah, unless there was another Rebekah close by and handy.
Right.
Yeah, you know what I mean. So what we see here is not someone who is sent out to take a wife, like it's often portrayed. Mm-hmm. It's you search out a wife. And the servant does it exactly properly. He goes out, he is in the right place, he makes the arrangement, he prays, he says, look, here's what I need to know. I need to know which one of these people you've picked out, if any of them. Mm-hmm. And he's directly led to Rebekah. He makes the offer of the gold. She goes home. The servant and Rebekah's father negotiate. But ultimately, it's up to Rebekah.
Right.
Okay. Let's fast forward a few hundred years. Because this becomes the foundation of the what's considered the Hebrew betrothal ceremony or ritual or whatever, however you want to say it. This is where it comes from. And very quickly, what it is a young man looks around, and they used to go off to other towns to find somebody, but as things got more populated and the whole thing turned around, and then actually after Mount Sinai, when you knew who you could and couldn't marry anymore, mm-hmm. that whole scenario happened. It was a little easier to figure out what was going on. So a young man would look around, he would be knowing what he wanted out of life, seeing women young ladies around who would kind of hint at whether they would be agreeable or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the young man and his father, once he thought he found somebody he could live with, once he, and as I like to say, picked the kind of crazy he thought he could live with, they would go to the home of the prospective bride.
Mm-hmm.
And they would do exactly what the servant did. They would negotiate with an offering of some type of, something of value. It doesn't matter whether it's gold. It didn't matter whether it was animals. It didn't matter whether it was cloth. Whatever it could be. There is a lesson we get in recent history. This is only about 10 years old, where a young man and a young woman in Israel were eating lunch. And they'd been, kind of teasing each other for a while. Several months, apparently. And he hands her a cookie and says, "With this cookie I thee wed," and she accepted it and ate it. And the rabbis went nuts because now he has to write her a bill of divorce. Because technically,
they were married.
They were betrothed. Yeah. So, when the young man and his father go to the home of the prospective bride and they negotiate, there's conversation there. Now, they invite the young lady in, okay? Hey, Sean, how are you?
Hi, Sean.
The young lady now, she comes into the room, and the prospective groom, or the hopeful groom at this point, pours a glass of wine and hands it to the young lady.
Mm-hmm.
Now, she will take that cup, but she has a choice to make. Just like Rebecca had a choice to make when her family came out and said, "Will you go with him?" And she said yes. At that point, Rebecca and Isaac were as good as married. So now what we see is the young man hands his hopeful a cup of wine. Need to say this. Not a rabbit trail either. Wine in the Hebrew culture represents two things. It represents blood and it represents life. What he's doing is he's saying, if you take this, I will lay down my life for you. I will shed my blood for you. Whatever is mine is yours. She has a choice. She takes the cup. She can either drink it, and in which case that is an acknowledgement. Yes, I want this to happen. Or she can hand it back to him. Maybe she's seen somebody with a few more camels. I don't know. In which case, the whole deal's off. It's up to the female.
Right.
It's up to the female. And we think we think that's a matriarchal society? Who's in control here? Let's face it, guys. Who's in control in our world today? Really. Be honest. You all know. Y'all know, right? But that's the way they negotiated the betrothal ceremony. Now, if that sounds vaguely familiar, Yeshua, Jesus, uses this, and we see it in Matthew 26 and in Luke 22. Wine is poured, right?
Mm-hmm.
He hands it to the disciples, and he says, "Drink from this." Luke says, "Divide the cup," right? All of you are going to drink. What he's using is something very familiar. Mm-hmm. He's using this betrothal ceremony. It goes right back to this parable of the bride and the wedding. And he says, here it is. You can do this, and if you drink from this, it's as good as done. He's saying, I'm going to lay down my life for you. I'm going to shed my blood for you. Then he says something interesting. Well, not right then, but very closely to there. He says, in my Father's house are many mansions, right? Mm-hmm. I go to prepare a place for you. Back up to the hopeful groom. If the young lady said yes and she drinks the wine, now the groom gets to go prepare a place. Mm-hmm. Christians, this should be very, very familiar to you. It's the thing today we call communion. Unfortunately, around the 10th and 11th century, the church really blew it. because they perverted this celebration of what we could call the Last Supper today, and they completely eradicated any mention of the betrothal ceremony. Now, the church wants to be called the bride of Christ, right? Mm-hmm. So today, when you're taking communion and you drink that, you're saying yes.
That's it. You're
as good as married. Folks, you got to stop taking this lightly. Just because the early Catholic Church messed it up and perverted this, and they combined it with an older, much older pagan tradition, it still represents what it is. That is, when you drink that cup, when you drink that wine or that grape juice or whatever it happens to be today, you're saying yes. Mm-hmm. Now, you do that, you better be serious, because when you walk out the door, if you commit adultery, what happened to an adulterer in a relationship? It wasn't pretty. Wasn't pretty at all. This whole concept of women being treated lesser is ridiculous. The whole concept of the bride of the Messiah being treated lesser is ridiculous. It is our job to help finish and establish the kingdom on earth. It is the singular woman's job, when she comes beside a man, to be the one that is opposite of him. Everything he's weak in, she's strong in. Everything she's weak in, he's strong in. You know, one of the things you noticed tonight when we sat down here and I turned the camera on, I was sitting here by myself in this color shirt. Mm-hmm. Folks on Spreaker can't hear it or can't see it. But I sat down, I'm like, man, that shirt just washes me out. She sat down next to me and
it made it green.
So, you know, it's like that whole completeness thing, right?
Right.
You know, where I'm lacking, you're supposed to be filling that up. A lot of times you'll hear marriage is 50-50.
No.
If you think marriage is 50-50, you will fail. Mm-hmm. Because marriage is 100-100. If you're not willing to give of yourself everything completely, it's not going to work.
No.
The really neat thing about marriage is it's in covenant not with just two people, but also the Almighty. Mm-hmm. So what happens is days where maybe you're not 100%.
Like lately, I've been like 50. So you've been doing 150%.
The Almighty reaches down and He says, I got the other 50%, not a problem. But He doesn't give it to you.
He gives it to
He gives it to me, and it's my job to give it to her. So that's how that's supposed to work. The days that I'm not 100%, He's not giving me what I need to make up for it. He's giving it to her, and sometimes you have to force it down my throat, but that's the way it works. Mm-hmm. Okay? This whole concept of women are less is baloney. Mm-hmm. We see the change as they come out of the Babylonian exile. Everything prior to that, they were almost exalted. Mm-hmm. The woman's role was to be really the grounding effect. Where a guy was willing to go off the handle, she should be the one to stand there and say, wait, just relax. Just relax. It's okay. We see that, I believe it's in 2 Kings 4, 1 Kings 4. The Shunammite woman, their son dies, and she goes to her husband, and she says, I need a servant and a donkey to go see the prophet. And he looks at her and he's like, what are you talking about? You know, you don't need a servant and a donkey. It's not Shabbat. It's not a new moon. And she just looks at him. You know, in English, it says be still or be calm or whatever it is. But in Hebrew, it reads, she says, shalom, which means I don't have time for your chaos. I don't have time for your destruction. I need what I need, and you're going to give it to me. Mm-hmm. She says that again when she meets the servant of the prophet. You know, he comes out, what's going on? She just looks at him and she says, I don't have time for your chaos. I don't have time for your destruction. Just shalom. Let me speak to the prophet. women weren't, even when they met other people other than, outside of the family, they were not treated as second-class citizens. They were treated very well. So don't think that as you read your Bible, you look at God and go, how can you treat women this way? You can't do it. Paul explains things to the Romans, the Colossians, the Ephesians, and he explains it to them in a way that they can understand it. He never changes what he says. He simply changes the way he says it. But we read it and we go, well, he's saying this here, and he's saying that there, and he's saying this over here. I just don't understand. Well, first of all, it wasn't written directly to you. You might not be able, you're reading somebody else's mail, literally. In Paul's case, you're reading somebody else's mail, so you might not be able to understand it. It's just there. It just is. But you put all of it together, Paul understood completely everything that he was telling these people. Paul, in my opinion, was studying, he studied at the feet of Gamaliel, right? The most well-known rabbi there was at the time. I think Paul had his sights set really on being a high priest. I think that's what he had his sights set on. I really do. Think so. So he knew this stuff. He could start at Genesis 1:1 and start speaking, and he had memorized each and every book to the end of Deuteronomy. How many books of the Bible have you had memorized? See, I can't memorize them because we have so many different translations in English. I know where to go find things. I know what it says, but I could get translations really confused, really easy. So, there we go. But it's really, really important when we're reading this stuff, when we're trying to understand this stuff, that we know the context of what we're looking at, and that we can see the differences and the changes over time that we're going to look at. There's clues in the language if we will read it, and it even happens in English. And if you understand the culture, that's even better.
It's a big help.
It's a big help. There is a really, really good class going on at Crossroad Church right now where they're learning a little bit of Hebrew. It's actually designed for kindergartners or third graders. Third graders. It's on the third grade level, and they're having a blast because they're learning things, they're seeing things more than just the language. They're learning about the culture, and they're learning that sometimes understanding how somebody else lived makes a difference. So
that's right.
That's really all I have this evening. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, or are you're good?
No, I'm fine.
You're good? All right.
Yes.
Folks, we certainly appreciate everybody who's been with us on Facebook, everybody who's been with us on Spreaker, or who will be on us with Spreaker, because a lot of people listen to this later.
Right.
We do this live on Thursdays at 7:30 here. Other parts of the world, it's not 7:30.
No.
So it's other times, which is why it's out there. So, all right. All that being said, we certainly appreciate it. Don't forget to hit those like buttons and share buttons.
Yes.
Tell folks about us because, really, everybody has an agenda. I'm up front with mine. My agenda is convincing you to live the way that your Creator designed you to live. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful week.
Thanks for joining.